The rain fell in sheets, not with the gentle persistence of a summer shower, but with the cold, driving fury of a city that had forgotten how to weep. It hammered against the panoramic windows of Arthur Vance's corner office on the 57th floor, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass that separated him from the world. Below, the city was a smear of gray concrete and blurred, frantic lights. Taxis like luminous yellow beetles crawled through the canyons of steel, their horns a muted, impotent bleat against the storm's roar. Arthur hated the rain. It was inefficient. It slowed things down, snarled traffic, and made the leather of his $1,000 shoes spot. He straightened the knot of his silk tie, his reflection a sharp, severe silhouette against the tempest outside. Graying temples, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky. Eyes that had assessed billion-dollar mergers with the same dispassionate chill they now turned on the weather. His phone buzzed, a sleek black monolith on his expansive mahogany desk. It was Albright, his assistant, her disembodied voice crisp and professional even through the speaker. "Mr. Vance, your car's waiting downstairs. Traffic is heavy due to the weather. You'll need to leave now to make your 7 o'clock meeting with the board." He didn't reply, simply swiped a hand over the phone to dismiss her. Of course the car was waiting. Of course the traffic was heavy. These were constants, predictable variables in the complex algorithm of his life. He picked up a framed photograph from his desk, the only personal item in the surgically clean office. It was of a sleek, silver yacht cutting through a turquoise sea, its sails taut against a perfect cloudless sky. It was his yacht, the Serenity. He'd named it ironically. Serenity was a commodity, something to be purchased and displayed, not a state of being. He placed the photo back down with a precise click and strode out of the office, his footsteps silent on the plush charcoal gray carpet. The elevator ride down was a smooth, soundless descent, a journey from his skybound throne to the grimy reality of the street. The lobby was a cavern of marble and hushed reverence, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and rain-soaked wool. The doorman, a stoic figure in a heavy greatcoat, saw him coming and pushed the revolving door, a gesture of practiced deference. A blast of wind and the smell of wet asphalt hit him as he stepped under the building's awning. His driver, a man whose name he'd never bothered to learn, was holding an oversized black umbrella, a silent sentinel by the open door of the waiting sedan. Arthur was about to duck into the warm, leathery embrace of the car when a small force collided with his leg. "Please, sir." The voice was a tiny, desperate squeak, nearly lost in the urban symphony of the storm. He looked down, his face a mask of irritation. A child. A girl, no older than 7 or 8, was clinging to the fabric of his tailored trousers. Her hair was a mess of wet, dark curls plastered to her pale, thin face. She was soaked to the bone, her thin pink jacket offering no protection against the deluge. She was shivering, and her large brown eyes were wide with a terror that transcended the simple misery of being caught in the rain. "Please, you have to help me," she repeated, her voice trembling. Arthur's first instinct was a flash of cold fury. Security was lax. How had this street urchin gotten so close? He looked around for a parent, a guardian, anyone to claim this inconvenience. But the sidewalk was a fleeting river of anonymous figures hunched under umbrellas. "Let go of me," he said, his voice low and sharp. He tried to pull his leg away, but her grip was surprisingly strong, her small fingers digging into the expensive material of his suit. "I'm sorry, sir," she sobbed, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. "But I have to. She said you would know." The driver took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, should I call security?" Arthur waved him off with an impatient flick of his wrist. He reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a slim, platinum money clip. He peeled off several $100 bills, the paper crisp and new. "Here, he said, thrusting the money at her. "Go buy yourself a coat. And a meal. Now let go." The girl recoiled as if the money had burned her. She shook her head violently, her wet hair flinging droplets of water onto his shoes. "No, I don't want money. I need you." Her desperation was escalating into a full-blown wail, attracting the glances of passers-by. Arthur felt a hot prickle of embarrassment. A scene. He hated scenes. They were messy, unpredictable, and bad for his public image. "Listen to me, child," he began, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "I am late for a very important meeting. I have offered you money. Take it and go before I have you removed." But she wasn't listening. Her small hands fumbled with the zipper of her jacket. She pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in a clear plastic baggie. It was an old photograph, the corners soft and frayed, the colors faded to a dreamy sepia. She held it up to him with both hands, a reverent offering. "It's my mommy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She's sick. She said to find the man from the Star. She said you'd know her." Arthur glanced down, his mind already formulating the scathing words he would have for his head of security. His gaze was meant to be a final, dismissive flick before he tore his leg away and disappeared into his car. But it wasn't. His eyes landed on the photograph, and the world, in an instant, stopped turning. The cacophony of the city, the rain, the traffic, the distant sirens, vanished. The cold wind ceased to bite, his own breath hitched in his throat, a painful, sharp gasp. It couldn't be. After all these years, after everything he had done to bury that life, to erase it from his memory, to become someone else entirely. It couldn't be her, but it was. The woman in the photograph was younger, her face unlined and full of a light he hadn't seen in decades, but it was unmistakably her. The way her hair curled just so around her temples. The small, almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. And her smile. That radiant, heartbreaking smile that could make you believe in things like forever. Ilara. His mind, a fortress of logic and calculation, fractured. A flood of memories, vivid and violent, broke through the dams he had so carefully constructed over 25 years. The scent of honeysuckle on a warm summer night. The feel of her hand in his. The sound of her laughter as they danced in the kitchen of a tiny, run-down apartment. The taste of cheap wine and impossible dreams. He was no longer Arthur Vance, the titan of industry, standing on a rain-swept street. He was Artie, a skinny, ambitious kid from the wrong side of the tracks, a boy who had loved a girl named Ilara, with a desperation that had terrified him. "Sir?" The driver's voice pierced the bubble of silence, tentative and concerned. "Mr. Vance, are you all right?" Arthur didn't hear him. He was staring at the photo, at Ilara's face, and then at the face of the crying child in front of him. The same wide brown eyes. The same stubborn set of her jaw. It was like looking at a ghost and her echo. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling, and gently took the photograph from the girl. He turned it over. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a single, crudely drawn 5-pointed star. Their symbol. The secret they shared. A promise to reach for the stars. Together. A promise he had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The $100 bills slipped from his other hand, forgotten, and were instantly snatched by the wind, cartwheeling down the wet pavement like lost autumn leaves. He knelt, oblivious to the rain soaking through the knees of his trousers, oblivious to the stares of the crowd. He was eye level with the little girl now. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper he didn't recognize as his own. "Lily," she said, her sobs subsiding into hiccuping shudders. "My name is Lily." He looked from her face to the photograph and back again. 25 years of carefully constructed denial crumbled into dust. This girl, this child of the storm, was not an inconvenience. She was a reckoning. Lily, he repeated, the name feeling foreign and yet terrifyingly familiar on his tongue. He finally looked up at his driver, his eyes wild with an emotion the man had never seen before. Cancel the meeting. The driver, a man named George who had worked for Arthur for 6 years and had never heard him raise his voice or utter a word that wasn't a command, simply nodded, his face a study in professional impassivity. He opened the back door wider. Arthur stood, his knees protesting the sudden movement, and gently guided Lily toward the car. She flinched for a moment, a lifetime of caution ingrained in her small frame. But something in his face must have changed, some of the glacial hardness melting away, because she allowed him to help her into the plush leather seat. He slid in beside her, pulling the heavy door shut, and the roar of the city was instantly reduced to a distant hum. The interior of the car smelled of leather and wood polish, a sterile, masculine scent that was suddenly, jarringly wrong. Lily huddled on the far side of the seat, a small, damp bundle in the vast, luxurious space. She was still clutching the plastic-wrapped photo, now empty of its content. Arthur held the original in his hand, his thumb stroking the worn edge. He couldn't take his eyes off it. Ilara looked so young, so full of a fierce, untamed joy. He remembered the day it was taken. It was at the county fair. He'd spent his last $10 trying to win her a giant stuffed bear at a rigged ring toss game. He'd failed, of course, but she had laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and told him she didn't need a bear. She'd kissed him right there in front of everyone, and his friend Jimmy had snapped the picture with a cheap, disposable camera. He had hated the photo at the time. He thought he looked too skinny, too poor, his smile too wide and goofy. But Ilara had loved it. She said it was the only picture where he looked truly happy. She'd kept it in her wallet. "Where is your mother, Lily?" Arthur asked, his voice softer than he intended. Lily shrank back a little. "She's resting at a special place for people who are very tired." A hospice. The word hung unspoken in the silent car. His heart, a cold, dormant muscle, gave a painful thud. "She told me to find you," Lily continued, her voice gaining a little confidence. "She said you were the man from the star, from her stories." Stories? About a boy named Artie who wanted to catch a star, and a girl who promised to help him. She said Artie got lost a long time ago, but that you would know where to find him. Artie. No one had called him that in a quarter of a century. He had legally changed his name when he founded his first company, Vance Tech. Arthur Vance sounded solid, dependable, wealthy. Artie sounded like a dreamer from a dead-end town, with grease under his fingernails. "George," Arthur said, his voice strained, "take us back to the office." "Sir?" "You heard me. Back to the building." The car executed a smooth, illegal U-turn, earning an angry honk from a taxi. Lily watched the city lights slide by, her breath fogging a small patch on the window. Arthur watched her. He saw the way she nervously pleated the hem of her wet jacket, a gesture so painfully familiar it stole the air from his lungs. Ilara used to do that when she was nervous. He had built an empire on his ability to recognize patterns, to analyze data, and predict outcomes. And the data was right in front of him, undeniable and devastating. The journey back up to the 57th floor was a mirror image of his descent, but this time he was not alone. He led Lily through the hushed lobby, ignoring the stunned look on the doorman's face. In the elevator, she looked up at the illuminated numbers, her eyes wide with wonder. "Is this what it's like to be in a cloud?" she asked. Arthur, for the first time in his adult life, was at a loss for words. "Something like that," he managed. Albright was waiting for them when the elevator doors opened, her face a carefully composed mask of concern. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, who had been with Arthur for 15 years. She had seen him through hostile takeovers, market crashes, and a bitter divorce. She had never seen him look like this. His hair was damp and disheveled, his suit was stained with rainwater, and he was holding the hand of a shivering, bedraggled child. "Mr. Vance," she said, her eyes flicking from him to Lily. "Is everything all right?" The board can wait." He cut her off. "Ms. Albright, this is Lily. She will be staying with us for a while. I need you to arrange a few things." Albright didn't miss a beat. Her professionalism was a force of nature. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "First clothes, dry clothes, and food. Something a child would eat. Then, I need you to contact my private investigator, Mr. Thorne. I have a job for him, an urgent one." He led Lily into his office, the vast space seeming to swallow her whole. She stood in the center of the plush rug, dripping a small puddle onto the floor, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the minimalist, intimidating furniture. "Wow," she breathed. "It's like a castle in the sky." Arthur walked over to his desk and sat down heavily in his leather chair. He felt hollowed out. The rigid structure of his life had been dynamited, and he was standing in the rubble. He looked at Lily, a tiny, living ghost from a past he had tried to murder. What was he supposed to do? He had protocols for everything, for market downturns, for corporate espionage, for legal challenges. He had no protocol for a daughter, because that's what she was. He didn't need a DNA test. He just knew. He saw it in the stubborn tilt of her chin, in the intelligence in her eyes, in the ghost of Ilara's smile that played on her lips. Ms. Albright returned a few minutes later with a fluffy bathrobe from the executive gym and a warm blanket. She knelt before Lily, her voice soft and kind. "Hello, Lily. My name is Carol. Let's get you out of those wet things, shall we?" Lily looked to Arthur for permission. He gave a small, jerky nod. As Carol led her to his private bathroom, Lily paused at the door and looked back at him. "You found him, right?" she asked. "Artie, you know where he is?" Arthur stared at the photograph of Ilara, her smiling face a silent accusation. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I know where he is." While Carol helped Lily, Arthur called his investigator. Kean Thorne was the best in the business, discreet, thorough, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. He was a necessary tool for a man in Arthur's position, someone to dig up dirt on business rivals or perform background checks on potential partners. He had never been used for something like this. "Thorne," Arthur said, his voice tight. "I have a name for you, Ilara Jensen." He spelled it out. "I need to know everything, where she is, what her situation is, everything. I want a full report on my desk by morning." "That's a tight timeline, Vance." Thorne's gravelly voice came through the speaker. "It'll cost you." "I don't care what it costs," Arthur snapped. "Just do it." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The headache that had been threatening all day had descended with a vengeance. He felt a wave of nausea. Guilt. It was an unfamiliar sensation, a poison he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 25 years. He had rationalized his decision to leave Ilara 1,000 times. He was young, scared, and suffocatingly poor. He saw the scholarship as a lifeboat, and in his panic, he had convinced himself there was only room for one. He'd told himself he was setting her free. Free to find someone who could give her a stable life, someone who wasn't haunted by the desperate need to escape. He'd sent her all the money he had, a few $1,000s saved from working 2 jobs. It had seemed like a fortune then. He'd written a letter, a coward's farewell, full of empty justifications and false promises. And then he had run. He had changed his name, cut ties with everyone from his old life, and poured all of his energy, all of his rage and fear and ambition into building his empire. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He was Arthur Vance, a name that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But Artie, the boy who loved a girl named Alara, had died on the day he mailed that letter, or so he had thought. Lily emerged from the bathroom, looking small and fragile in his oversized bathrobe. Her wet clothes were in a neat pile in Carol's hands. Carol had also managed to procure a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of milk from the executive dining room. Lily sat on the edge of one of the leather sofas, taking small, hesitant bites of the sandwich. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, but also determined. She was her mother's daughter, no doubt about it. "Is the star a secret?" she asked, her mouth full of bread and cheese. Arthur was startled by the question. "What?" "The star on the back of the picture. Mommy said it was our secret, a secret between her and Artie." He nodded slowly. "Yes, it was." He remembered the night it started. They were sitting on the roof of their apartment building, looking up at the star-dusted sky. He was feeling overwhelmed, talking about his dreams of creating software that could change the world, and how impossible it all seemed. Alara had taken his hand and, using a pen she always carried for her sketches, had drawn a small star on the back of it. "There," she'd said, "one for you to hold on to, so you don't forget where you're going." After that, it became their ritual. Before every exam, every job interview, every time he felt like giving up, she would draw a star on his hand. It was her way of saying, "I believe in you." The memory was so clear, so painful, that he had to look away. He focused on the city lights, a glittering, impersonal tapestry of success. He had reached the stars, hadn't he? He lived at the top of a skyscraper, flew in a private jet, and his net worth had more zeros than he could be bothered to count. He had gotten everything he thought he wanted. So why did he feel so empty? Lily finished her sandwich and her eyes began to droop. Carol, ever efficient, had already anticipated this. "I've had one of the sleep pods in the wellness center prepared, Mr. Vance. It will be quiet and comfortable for her there." Arthur nodded his approval. He watched as Carol gently helped Lily up and led her out of the office. At the door, Lily turned again. "Will you tell Artie I found him?" she asked, her voice sleepy. "Will you tell him my mommy misses him?" The door clicked shut, leaving Arthur alone in the vast, silent office. He picked up the photograph of Alara again, his fortress of solitude now a prison of regret. The storm outside had begun to subside, but the storm inside Arthur Vance was just beginning. He didn't go home that night. He couldn't face the echoing emptiness of his penthouse apartment. He stayed in his office, the city lights his only companions. He didn't work. He just sat in his chair, the photograph in his hand, and let the memories wash over him. He remembered Alara's passion for art. She could take a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper and create something beautiful. She saw beauty everywhere, in the rust patterns on an old fire escape, in the face of a weary commuter on the bus. He had always been focused on the future, on the next goal, the next achievement. She had taught him to see the present. He remembered their arguments. He would get frustrated with her for not being more practical, for spending her meager savings on art supplies instead of a new coat. She would get angry with him for being so focused on money, for not understanding that a life without passion was no life at all. "You're not a machine, Artie," she would say, her eyes flashing. "You have a heart. You should try using it sometime." He had thought her naive, a romantic dreamer who didn't understand the harsh realities of the world. Now sitting in his sterile office, surrounded by the trappings of his success, he realized she had been the wise one all along. He had traded a life of color and passion for a world of black and white, of profit and loss. And the loss, he was beginning to understand, was immeasurable. At dawn, a bleary-eyed Ms. Albright entered with a fresh coffee and a tablet computer. "Mr. Thorne sent his preliminary report, sir," she said, her voice soft. She placed the tablet on the desk. Arthur stared at it, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. He took a deep breath and opened the file. It was all there, laid out in Thorne's typically blunt, factual style. Ilara Jensen, age 45. No criminal record. A string of low-paying jobs, waitress, cleaner, cashier. A series of cheap rented apartments, each one a little shabbier than the last. She had never married. The report included a recent photograph, a candid shot taken from a distance. She was leaving a small corner store, a bag of groceries in her arms. She looked tired. The vibrant light in her eyes that he remembered was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. But she was still beautiful. Her smile was gone, but the kindness in her face remained. And then he saw the address. A hospice, just as he'd feared. St. Jude's Hospice, located in one of the city's poorer neighborhoods, a place he usually only flew over in his helicopter. The report included her medical diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The prognosis was stark. A cold clinical sentence. Weeks. Maybe a month. His breath caught in his chest. He felt a physical pain, a sharp twisting sensation in his gut. All those years while he was building his empire, she had been fighting. For her life. For their daughter. Alone. He had left her to face this alone. The report also contained information about Lily. Lily Jensen. Age 8. Enrolled in a public school. Attendance sporadic recently due to her mother's illness. Teachers described her as bright, quiet, and a talented artist. She was always drawing, they said. Mostly pictures of stars. Arthur closed the file, a wave of self-loathing so intense it made him dizzy. He had spent 25 years telling himself he had done the right thing, that he had given her a chance at a better life without him. It was a lie. A monstrous, self-serving lie. He had abandoned her. He had condemned her and their daughter to a life of poverty and struggle, all for the sake of his own ambition. He stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Albright," he said, his voice raw. "Get the car. We're going to St. Jude's." The drive to the hospice was a journey through a different city. The gleaming skyscrapers and pristine avenues of his world gave way to a landscape of crumbling brick tenements, graffiti-scarred walls, and streets littered with trash. It was the world he had come from, the world he had spent his entire life trying to escape. St. Jude's was a modest, two-story brick building, clean but weathered. It had a small, well-tended garden out front, a splash of color in the gray urban landscape. Arthur walked through the front doors, feeling as though he were an alien visiting a foreign planet. The air inside smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, a scent that immediately transported him back to the hospital where his own mother had died when he was a teenager. A kindly, middle-aged nurse with tired eyes greeted him at the reception desk. "Can I help you?" "Oh, I'm here to see Ilara Jensen," he said, the name feeling strange and heavy on his tongue. The nurse gave him a sympathetic smile. "Are you family?" He hesitated. What was he? He was a ghost, a coward, a stranger. "Yes," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'm an old friend." She led him down a quiet, sunlit corridor. The rooms were small, each with a single bed and a window overlooking the garden. It was peaceful, but it was the peace of a final waiting room. The nurse stopped in front of a closed door. "She has good days and bad days," she said in a low voice. "Today is a good day. She's weak, but she's lucid. Please don't tire her out." He nodded, his heart pounding against his ribs. The nurse gave him another sad smile and left him alone in the hallway. He stood there for a long moment, his hand hovering over the doorknob. What would he say? How could he possibly explain 25 years of silence? He took a deep breath, turned the knob, and stepped inside. The room was simple, decorated with a few of Lily's drawings taped to the wall. They were vibrant and full of life, a stark contrast to the sterile medical equipment beside the bed. Ilara was lying in the bed, propped up by pillows. She was so thin, so fragile. The vibrant, life-loving girl he remembered was a pale shadow, but her eyes, when they turned to him, were the same. They held the same warmth, the same intelligence, the same uncanny ability to see right through him. A slow smile touched her lips. "Artie," she whispered, her voice a faint, raspy sound. "I knew you'd come. Lily is very persuasive." He walked slowly to her bedside, feeling clumsy and out of place. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words were stuck in his throat, choked by a mountain of regret. "Ilara," he finally managed, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry." She shook her head slightly, a gesture that seemed to take all of her strength. Not now. There's no time for sorry." She patted the edge of the bed. "Sit." He pulled up a small wooden chair and sat down, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at her hands, thin and pale, resting on the white blanket. "Why didn't you cash the check?" he asked, the question that had haunted him since he read Thorne's report. "It wasn't a lot, I know, but it would have helped." "It was your dream money, Artie," she said simply. "It was the money you saved to start your future. I couldn't take that from you, and I guess I was proud. And angry." She paused, taking a shallow breath. "I was so angry at you, for a long time, but I never stopped loving you." He finally looked up at her, tears blurring his vision. "I was a coward, Ilara. I was scared. I saw the poverty we grew up in, and I was terrified of being trapped, of trapping you and a child." "I know," she said, her voice full of a weary understanding that was more painful than any accusation. "You always ran from the things that scared you." He reached out and took her hand. It was cold and weightless in his. "I made a terrible mistake," he whispered. "I threw away the only thing that ever mattered." "No," she said, her grip surprisingly firm. "You didn't throw it away. You just lost it. And now you have a chance to find it again." Her eyes shifted to the drawings on the wall. "Look at her, Artie. She's our daughter. She's the best parts of both of us. Your brilliance, your determination, and my heart. She's so full of love." He followed her gaze. One of the drawings depicted a small girl holding hands with a tall man, both of them looking up at a night sky filled with oversized, brightly colored stars. "She needs you," Ilara continued, her voice growing weaker. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm just afraid of leaving her alone. I sent her to find you because I knew. I knew that deep down, under all that money and success, the boy I loved was still in there somewhere, the boy who promised to catch a star." She started to cough, a dry, rattling sound that shook her frail body. He poured her a glass of water from the carafe on the bedside table and helped her take a small sip. "Don't talk," he said, his voice thick. "Rest." She leaned back against the pillows, her eyes closing for a moment. "I kept everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "In a box, under the bed. Your old books, the letters you wrote me before you left. I wanted Lily to have them, so she would know the man her father was." He looked under the bed and saw a worn cardboard box. He pulled it out and placed it on his lap. It was filled with relics from a life he had discarded. A tattered copy of a programming manual he had practically memorized. A collection of her sketches of him, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. His own letters sent from his dorm room during his first few months of college, full of excitement and loneliness and love for her. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the box was a thick, unopened envelope. His last letter. The one he had sent with the money. The one that had ended everything. It was postmarked 25 years ago. Return to sender. Address unknown. She had moved. She had never even gotten it. She had never known why he left. She had just known that he was gone. He looked at her, a wave of agony so profound it felt like he was drowning. All these years he had told himself she knew his reasons, that she had accepted his choice. But she had never known. She had just been abandoned. Elara, he choked out, the last letter. But she didn't hear him. Her breathing had become shallow. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful, a faint smile on her lips. He held her hand, the cold seeping into his own skin. He thought of all the years he had wasted, all the moments he had missed. Lily's first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He had traded it all for an empty empire. He sat there with her for hours, long after the sun had set and the hospice had grown quiet. He held her hand and whispered the words he should have said 25 years ago. He told her he loved her. He told her he was sorry. He begged her to forgive him. And in the quiet stillness of the room, as the first light of dawn painted the sky, Elara Jensen, the girl who had believed in a boy named Artie, slipped away. Arthur didn't weep. The grief was too vast, too deep for tears. It was a hollow, aching void in the center of his being. He had been given a second chance, but he was 25 years too late. He gently placed her hand back on the blanket, stood up, and picked up the cardboard box. He walked out of the room, past the sleeping nurse at the station, and into the cool morning air. He had a promise to keep. Returning to the office was like entering a mausoleum. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Ms. Albright was already there, her face etched with a quiet concern that went beyond professional duty. She had seen him leave with a grim determination and return a broken man. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice gentle. "Lily is still sleeping. I've arranged for a suite at the hotel connected to the building. It will be more comfortable for her." He nodded numbly, placing the cardboard box on his desk as if it were a sacred artifact. "Thank you, Carol," he said, using her first name for the first time in 15 years. The simple act seemed to startle them both. "I need you to handle something for me. Cancel my schedule indefinitely. Liquidate my holdings in Vance Tech." She gasped, her composure finally cracking. "Sir? All of them? That's your life's work." "No," he said, his voice hollow as he looked at the box. "My life's work has been waiting for me for 8 years. I was just too blind to see it. Start a foundation. In her name. The Elara Jensen Foundation. Its purpose will be to support single mothers and young artists, funded with the proceeds from the sale." She stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. For years she had worked for a machine, a brilliant but soulless calculator of a man. The man standing before her now was a stranger. "Of course, Arthur," she said softly. He spent the rest of the morning going through the box. It was an act of penance, each item a fresh stab of guilt. He read his own letters, the words of a young man so full of hope and love that he barely recognized himself. He looked at her sketches, the way she had captured a tenderness in his face that he no longer possessed. He found a tiny pair of baby booties, knitted in a soft yellow yarn, tucked into a small envelope. He held them in the palm of his hand, their smallness a crushing weight. He was a father. He had been a father for 8 years, and he had been a complete and utter failure at it. The biggest challenge was not the logistics of changing his life, but the terrifying prospect of telling Lily about her mother. How do you tell a child that the center of her universe has vanished? He sought advice. He, Arthur Vance, who had never asked for help in his life, found himself on the phone with a child psychologist, a name provided by the ever-resourceful Ms. Albright. He listened, took notes, and felt a profound sense of inadequacy. Later that afternoon, he went to the hotel suite. Lily was awake, sitting at a large window overlooking the city, drawing in a sketchbook that Carol had bought for her. She was wearing a new set of clothes, a simple dress and sneakers, and she looked less like a lost waif and more like a little girl. She looked up as he entered, her eyes bright and questioning. "Did you find her?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "Did you see my mommy?" He sat down across from her, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He took her small hands in his. They were warm and soft. "Lily," he began, his voice raspy, "your mom was very, very tired. She had been fighting a sickness for a long time." Lily's face clouded over. She knew this. This was the preamble to the conversation she had been dreading. "She fought as hard as she could," Arthur continued, the psychologist's words feeling clumsy and hollow in his mouth. "But her body couldn't fight anymore. She's gone to a place where she can rest now, where there's no more pain." The little girl's face crumpled. The hope in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a devastating, bottomless grief. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. She pulled her hands away from his and wrapped her arms around herself, her small body shaking with silent sobs. He wanted to reach out, to hold her, to comfort her. But he felt like a fraud. What right did he have to comfort her? He was the cause of her pain, the architect of her loss. So he just sat there, a silent, useless witness to her heartbreak. "She loved you very much, Lily," he said quietly. "More than anything in the world. She told me so. Lily didn't respond. She just cried, her sobs growing louder, echoing in the luxurious, impersonal hotel suite. He had faced down hostile boardrooms, navigated treacherous market forces, and built an empire from nothing. But this, the simple, honest grief of a heartbroken child, was the most terrifying thing he had ever encountered. He had no protocol for this, no strategy. There was only the truth of his failure, stark and undeniable. That night, Lily cried herself to sleep. Arthur sat in a chair by her bed, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. He felt a fierce, unfamiliar wave of protectiveness. This was his daughter, his responsibility, his last chance at redemption. He had failed Alara. He would not fail Lily. The days that followed were a blur of awkward adjustments. He moved out of his sterile penthouse and bought a large, comfortable house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a place with a backyard for a child to play in. The house felt cavernously empty at first. He and Lily were two strangers, orbiting each other in a universe of grief. He tried to connect with her. He bought her toys, expensive dolls, and elaborate Lego sets, but they lay unopened in their boxes. He hired a world-class chef to cook her meals, but she barely touched her food. He was trying to solve the problem of her sadness the only way he knew how, by throwing money at it, and it wasn't working. One evening, about a week after Alara's death, he found Lily in her room, not crying, but sitting on the floor surrounded by papers from the cardboard box. She was looking at one of Alara's sketches of him. "Mommy said you were a good artist, too," she said without looking up. "She said you used to draw comics about a superhero named Captain Comet." He was stunned. He hadn't thought about Captain Comet in decades. It was a silly character he had made up as a teenager, a hero who could travel at the speed of light. He and Alara used to spend hours creating stories for him. "I wasn't very good," he said, his voice rusty. "She was the real artist." "Can you draw him for me?" Lily asked, looking up at him for the first time, a flicker of interest in her sad eyes. He hesitated. He hadn't drawn anything in years. His hands were used to signing checks and typing on a keyboard, not holding a pencil. But he couldn't refuse her. He sat down on the floor beside her, took a piece of paper and a pencil, and began to draw. His first few lines were clumsy, hesitant. But then, the muscle memory kicked in. He remembered the sharp angles of the hero's mask, the lightning bolt emblem on his chest. He drew Captain Comet flying through space, a determined look on his face. Lily watched, captivated. When he was finished, he showed it to her. It wasn't perfect, but it was recognizable. A small smile touched Lily's lips. It was the first time he had seen her smile. "Can you tell me a story about him?" she asked. And so he did. He told her a story about Captain Comet saving a planet from a giant meteor, a story he and her mother had made up one lazy Sunday afternoon. As he spoke, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He was no longer Arthur Vance, the billionaire tycoon. He was just a father, sitting on the floor, telling his daughter a bedtime story. It was a small thing, a drawing and a silly story, but it was a start. It was a bridge across the vast, silent chasm that separated them. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be the father Lily deserved. Maybe Artie wasn't as lost as he thought. The transformation was not instantaneous. It was a slow, arduous process, a daily exercise in dismantling the man he had become. Learning to be a father at 48 was like learning a new language in a foreign country where he didn't understand the customs. He made countless mistakes. He forgot about a parent-teacher conference. He packed her a lunch that consisted of a protein bar and a bottle of mineral water. He tried to have a serious conversation with her about her trust fund, and she just stared at him blankly before asking if they could get a dog. He got her the dog, a scruffy, energetic golden retriever puppy she named Comet. The dog brought a chaotic, joyful energy to the quiet house. It chewed on Arthur's expensive shoes and had accidents on the Persian rugs, and for the first time, Arthur found he didn't care. He found himself on his hands and knees, laughing as the puppy licked his face, and he saw Lily watching from the doorway, a real, genuine smile on her face. He learned to cook. He started with pancakes, following a recipe he found online. The first batch was a disaster, a collection of burnt, misshapen discs. Lily, however, ate them with surprising gusto, declaring them the best charcoal pancakes ever. He kept practicing, and soon, their weekend breakfasts became a cherished ritual. He discovered that he enjoyed the simple, methodical process of measuring and mixing, of creating something with his own hands. Ms. Albright, Carol, became an indispensable part of their new life. She transitioned seamlessly from being the ruthlessly efficient executive assistant to a warm, grandmotherly figure. She taught Arthur how to braid Lily's hair, how to check for fevers, and how to navigate the complex social politics of a third-grade classroom. She was the anchor that kept their small, makeshift family from drifting apart. Arthur also began to explore the contents of the cardboard box more deeply. He read Alara's journals, hesitantly at first, feeling like an intruder. But as he read, he began to understand the woman she had become. She wrote about her struggles, her fears, her loneliness. But mostly, she wrote about Lily. She wrote about the joy of watching her daughter learn to read, the pride she felt at her daughter's kindness, the fierce, all-consuming love that had kept her going through the darkest of times. He also discovered that Alara had never stopped painting. Tucked away in a portfolio, he found a collection of her artwork. They were beautiful, poignant landscapes, portraits of people she had met, and abstract pieces full of color and emotion. She had a real, undeniable talent, a talent the world had never had a chance to see. He had the paintings professionally framed and hung them throughout the house. Her art filled the rooms with her spirit, a constant, loving presence. He also made a point of visiting her grave every Sunday. He and Lily would bring flowers, usually a bouquet of the wildflowers Alara had loved to sketch. They would sit on the grass, and Arthur would tell Lily stories about her mother, stories about the funny, vibrant, passionate girl he had known. He told her about their first date, about their shared dreams, about the way she could light up a room with her laughter. It was painful, but it was a good pain. It was a way of keeping her memory alive, of weaving her into the fabric of their new life. One afternoon, while cleaning out his old office at Tech, a place he now rarely visited, he stumbled upon his old coding manuals and notebooks from college. He opened one and saw, in the margins of a complex algorithm, a small, faded star drawn in blue ink. Ilara had been with him all along, even when he had tried his hardest to forget. An idea began to form in his mind. He still had the skills, the knowledge that had built his empire. What if he could use them for something else, something meaningful? He set up a small workshop in his garage. He started tinkering, coding, creating. He wasn't building a platform to maximize shareholder value. He was building something for Lily. He was building something for Ilara. Months turned into a year, then 2. The sharp edges of their grief began to soften, replaced by a quiet, comfortable rhythm of life. Arthur became a fixture at Lily's school, the dad who volunteered for field trips and helped build the set for the school play. He was no longer the imposing, intimidating Arthur Vance. He was just Lily's dad. He realized that for the first time in his adult life, he was truly happy. It wasn't the fleeting, empty thrill of a successful business deal. It was a deep, abiding contentment, a quiet joy that came from making his daughter laugh, from watching her grow into a kind, confident, and talented young woman. He had lost an empire, but he had gained a soul. Years passed. The large, empty house became a warm, cluttered home, filled with Lily's artwork, Comet's toys, and the comfortable mess of a life well lived. Arthur's hair turned from gray to white. The harsh lines on his face softened, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. He looked older, but he also looked younger, the heavy burden of his ambition replaced by a lighter, more joyful spirit. Lily grew into a young woman who was a perfect blend of her parents. She had her father's sharp intellect and her mother's artistic soul. She excelled in school, but her true passion was painting. Her canvases were bold and vibrant, filled with a wisdom and emotion that belied her age. Her favorite subject, a recurring motif in all her work, was the night sky. On the evening of Lily's 18th birthday, Arthur took her to the garage. He pulled a dusty tarp off a large, complex-looking machine in the center of the room. It was a dome-shaped structure, about 10 feet in diameter, with a sleek, polished exterior. "What is it?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "It's your birthday present," Arthur said, a proud smile on his face. "It's something your mother and I used to dream about." He opened a small door on the side of the dome and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the space was dark, with 2 comfortable chairs in the center. They sat down, and Arthur typed a command into a small keypad. The dome whirred to life. And then, the darkness was filled with light. They were no longer in a garage. They were in space. The interior of the dome was a perfect, seamless projection of the night sky, a high-definition, immersive planetarium. Stars, nebulae, and galaxies swirled around them in breathtaking detail. "Wow," Lily breathed, her voice full of awe. "Dad, this is incredible." "I built it for you," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "I used the same principles of projection mapping and data visualization that I used to build my first company. But this is better." He typed another command, and the projection shifted. They were flying through the rings of Saturn, then soaring past the great red spot of Jupiter. "Your mother always wanted to travel," he said quietly. "She wanted to see the world. I was always so focused on my own journey that I forgot about hers. I thought maybe I could finally give her a trip to the stars." Lily reached out and took his hand. "She would have loved this," she whispered. "She's here, Dad. I can feel her." They sat there for a long time, in the silent, swirling cosmos of Arthur's creation. Two souls bound by love and loss, finding comfort in a shared dream. A few years later, Lily had her first major art exhibition. It was held in a prestigious downtown gallery, the same gallery that had once displayed a painting Arthur had bought for millions of dollars, a cold, abstract piece he had purchased as an investment. Tonight, the gallery was filled with life, with warmth, with Ilara's spirit channeled through her daughter's hands. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a massive, stunning painting. It was a swirling, abstract depiction of a supernova, a dying star giving birth to new worlds. It was full of vibrant colors, explosive energy, and a profound sense of hope. It was titled, simply, Ilara. Arthur stood in the crowd, watching his daughter as she spoke to admirers and critics, her face glowing with a quiet confidence. He felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought him to his knees. Carol, now happily retired, but still a cherished part of their family, stood beside him, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "She's so much like her mother," Carol said, her voice filled with affection. Later, when the crowds had thinned, Lily came and found him. She led him to her favorite piece, a smaller, more intimate painting. It depicted a small, grassy hill under a vast, star-dusted sky. On the hill sat a young woman and a young man, their faces obscured, looking up at the heavens. A faint, almost hidden detail in the painting was a small, five-pointed star, seemingly scratched into the canvas. "That's them, isn't it?" Arthur asked, his voice hoarse. Lily nodded. "I found your old sketches, the ones of you and Mom on the roof of your old apartment. I wanted to paint the feeling I got from them, the feeling of hope." She turned to him, her eyes, the same warm brown eyes as her mother's, shining with love. "Thank you, Dad," she said, "for everything, for finding Artie." He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this incredible young woman, his daughter. He had spent the first half of his life chasing stars, believing they were distant, cold, and unattainable. He had been wrong. The real stars had been with him all along. They were in the light in Ilara's eyes, in the hope in Lily's heart, and in the quiet, profound love that had, against all odds, redeemed a lost and broken man. As he held his daughter, he looked at the painting of the two young dreamers on the hill, and he finally understood. He hadn't just found Artie. He had finally, after a lifetime of running, brought him home. The millionaire who had once ignored a crying girl in the rain was gone, replaced by a man who knew the true measure of wealth was not in what you owned, but in who you loved. And in that, he was the richest man in the world. He felt a gentle touch on the back of his hand. He looked down. Lily, with her finger, was tracing the shape of a star onto his skin. The gallery was closing, the last of the guests drifting out into the cool night air, their voices echoing with praise for the young new artist. The staff moved quietly, respectfully, allowing the artist and her father their final moments. Arthur and Lily stood alone before the large supernova painting, Ilara. The canvas seemed to vibrate with a life of its own, a testament to the enduring power of a love that had outlasted death itself. "She never got to have a night like this," Arthur said, his voice a low murmur, more to himself than to Lily. "She had so much talent, so much light. The world should have known her name." "They do now," Lily replied softly, slipping her arm through his. "Because of you. You built her foundation. You funded scholarships for artists who were just like her, kids with big dreams and empty pockets. Her name is on the plaque of a dozen community art centers. Her spirit is in the work of every artist she's helped. You made sure the world would know her, Dad." He looked at his daughter, at the maturity and grace that now sat so comfortably on her. She had his drive, but none of his old, corrosive ambition. She had her mother's soul, tempered with a strength born from her own quiet struggles. "I did it all for you," he confessed, "everything after she was gone. I was just trying to be the man she would have wanted me to be, the father you deserved." "You were always the father I deserved," Lily said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You were just lost, and I was the map." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. A very persistent, very stubborn little map. He remembered her as a small child, her fierce determination in the face of his coldness, and felt a fresh wave of awe at her resilience. He had almost broken her spirit that day in the rain, but like her mother, she was made of stronger stuff. They were quiet for a moment, absorbing the peaceful aftermath of a successful night. Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. For a fleeting second, the old reflex kicked in, the urge to check, to respond, to manage. Then it was gone. He ignored it. There were no more billion-dollar deals, no more urgent board meetings. His world was no longer a global network of assets and liabilities. It was standing right beside him, her head on his shoulder. "Come on," Lily said, pulling him gently toward the exit. "Let's go home. Comet is probably waiting to attack you with puppy kisses." As they walked out of the gallery and into the gentle city night, the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. A light rain had begun to fall, a soft, cleansing drizzle, so different from the storm that had first brought them together. Arthur didn't have a driver or a limousine waiting. They walked to a modest, comfortable sedan parked a block away. His car, which he now drove himself. As he unlocked the doors, he paused and looked up at the sky. The city glow obscured most of the stars, but he knew they were there, a silent, glittering audience to their small human drama. He thought of his life as a story of two halves. The first half was a frantic, desperate climb, a relentless pursuit of something he had mistaken for success. The second half, the better half, had been a slow, patient journey of discovery, a rediscovery of the man he was always meant to be. It was a journey that had begun with a terrified little girl holding a faded photograph, an 8-year-old angel of mercy who had saved him from himself. He opened the passenger door for Lily, a small act of gentlemanly care he now performed without thinking. She smiled at him, a radiant, heartbreaking smile so much like her mother's. "You know," she said, her expression thoughtful, "Mommy used to say that everyone has a star inside them, a little piece of light. Sometimes, people just forget how to let it shine." Arthur looked at his daughter, his beautiful, brilliant daughter, who was so full of light it was almost blinding. "Your mother," he said, his voice thick with a love that spanned decades, "was the wisest person I ever knew." He got into the driver's seat and started the car. As they pulled away from the curb, joining the gentle flow of the city's traffic, he felt a profound sense of peace. The past was no longer a source of pain and regret, but a foundation of gratitude. He was grateful for every moment with Ilara, for the love that had shaped him. He was grateful for the years of loneliness and emptiness, for they had taught him the true value of connection, and most of all, he was grateful for Lily, the daughter who had given him a second chance not just at fatherhood, but at life. He reached over and took her hand. She squeezed it tightly. Outside, the city lights blurred into a beautiful, abstract river of color, and Arthur Vance, the man who had once owned the world but felt nothing, drove on, perfectly content with his small, precious universe.